Baby taught Mother Bear sign language to communicate with deaf child. Everyone was amazed. The morning mist hung low over the pine trees, and through the kitchen window, Savannah could see something moving between the shadows. She had seen it before, that same dark shape that appeared every morning just as the sun started painting the mountains gold. Her hands paused over the coffee pot, and she watched, waited, counted the seconds until the shape moved again. There it was, just beyond the tree line where their small clearing met the endless forest, something large and patient and impossibly still. Ethan was still sleeping upstairs with baby Lily, and the house held that special kind of quiet that only came in the early hours when the world seemed to pause between night and day. She poured her coffee slowly, never taking her eyes off that spot between the trees. The steam rose from her mug and fogged the window glass, but she wiped it clear with her sleeve, needing to see, needing to understand what had been watching them for the past 3 weeks. Living this far from town meant accepting certain things about nature, about sharing space with creatures that had been here long before any human had thought to build a cabin in these woods. But this was different. This wasn't a passing deer or a curious raccoon. This was something that came with purpose, something that waited and watched with an intelligence that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Not from fear exactly, but from a feeling she couldn't quite name. The first time she had mentioned it to Ethan, he had laughed in that gentle way of his, telling her she was probably just seeing shadows, or maybe a fallen log that looked different in the morning light. But Savannah knew shadows, and she knew logs, and this was neither. This was alive and aware, and choosing to be there, choosing to watch their little family from a distance that felt both safe and somehow intimate. She had started waking up earlier just to catch these moments, these silent morning meetings where she stood at the window and something stood at the edge of the forest, and they acknowledged each other without words or movement, just presence. Today felt different, though. Today, the shape moved forward. Just a step, maybe 2, and Savannah's breath caught in her throat. The coffee mug trembled slightly in her hands as the morning sun finally reached the right angle, and she saw it clearly for the first time. A bear. Not just any bear, but the largest black bear she had ever seen, with fur that caught the light like polished obsidian and eyes that held a depth of intelligence that made her forget to breathe. The bear stood on all fours, massive paws planted firmly in the soft earth, but there was nothing aggressive in its posture. If anything, it seemed almost hesitant, like it was gathering courage for something. Savannah set down her mug very slowly, very carefully, not wanting to make any sudden movements. That might startle the creature away. Part of her brain, the rational part that had read all the wilderness safety guides before moving out here, was screaming at her to step back from the window, to go wake Ethan, to check that all the doors were locked. But another part, a deeper part that operated on instinct rather than logic, told her to stay perfectly still and watch what would happen next. The bear took another step forward, now fully visible in the clearing, and Savannah could see its chest rising and falling with steady breaths. It was a female, she realized, noting the slightly smaller build despite its impressive size, and the way it moved with a certain careful grace that spoke of motherhood. The bear's head turned slightly, looking directly at the window where Savannah stood, and their eyes met across the distance. It should have been terrifying, making eye contact with a wild bear just yards from her home, where her baby daughter slept peacefully upstairs. But instead, Savannah felt something else entirely, something that made her place her hand flat against the cool window glass. Recognition. Not that she knew this particular bear, but recognition of something deeper, something shared between them that transcended species and language. The bear held her gaze for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, It sat down right there in the clearing, settling its massive bulk onto the ground with surprising gentleness. Upstairs, she heard Lily starting to wake up, those soft little sounds that meant she would need feeding soon. Ethan's footsteps crossed the bedroom floor above, the old boards creaking in that familiar pattern that told her he was heading to the nursery. But Savannah couldn't move from the window, couldn't break this strange moment that felt like the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. The bear remained seated, patient as a statue, watching the house with those intelligent eyes that seemed to be waiting for something, expecting something. "Savannah?" Ethan's voice drifted down the stairs, still thick with sleep. "Everything okay down there?" She wanted to answer him, wanted to tell him to come see this incredible sight, but she was afraid that any sound might break whatever spell had been cast over this morning. The bear's ears twitched at the sound of Ethan's voice, but it didn't move, didn't run, just continued its patient vigil. Finally, Savannah found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ethan, come down here, slowly, and bring Lily." She heard his footsteps pause, probably confused by her strange request and the odd tone in her voice. But Ethan had learned to trust her instincts over their years together, and soon she heard him moving down the stairs, Lily making soft gurgling sounds in his arms. He came up beside her at the window, and she felt rather than saw his whole body go rigid with surprise. "Is that—" he started, but his voice trailed off as he took in the sight of the massive bear sitting calmly in their yard, looking for all the world like it was waiting for an invitation to breakfast. Lily, 8 months old and blissfully unaware of any potential danger, reached out her chubby little hands toward the window, making the happy babbling sounds she always made when she saw something interesting. The bear's head tilted slightly at the sound, and something in its expression softened. It was such a human gesture, that softening, that Savannah felt her heart skip a beat. "How long has it been there?" Ethan whispered, his arm instinctively tightening around Lily while his other hand found Savannah's shoulder. "About 10 minutes now," Savannah whispered back, though she wasn't sure why they were whispering when the bear was clearly aware of their presence. "But, Ethan, I think this is the same one that's been watching us. Every morning for weeks now, there's been something at the tree line. I think it's been her all along." Ethan's hand squeezed her shoulder, and she could feel the tension in his grip. "We should call someone. The ranger station, maybe. This isn't normal behavior." But even as he said it, Savannah could hear the uncertainty in his voice, because nothing about this felt dangerous, despite every rational thought telling them it should. The bear wasn't exhibiting any of the aggressive behaviors they had been warned about. No huffing, no jaw-popping, no bluff charges. Just this patient, almost hopeful waiting. And then, as if making a decision, the bear stood up slowly and began walking. Not toward them, but parallel to the house, maintaining that same careful distance. It moved with deliberate steps, looking back over its shoulder as if making sure they were still watching. I think she wants us to see something," Savannah heard herself say, the words sounding absurd even as they left her mouth. But Ethan didn't laugh, didn't tell her she was being ridiculous, because they could both see it, the purposeful way the bear moved, the way it kept checking to make sure they were still at the window. It walked about 20 feet along the edge of the clearing, then sat down again, this time next to something Savannah hadn't noticed before. A small pile of objects at the base of a large pine tree. Without really thinking about it, Savannah found herself moving toward the back door, drawn by a curiosity that overrode every sensible thought in her head. "Savannah, no," Ethan said sharply, but she was already turning the doorknob, already stepping out onto the porch. The morning air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and something wild and musky that must have been the bear. The animal turned its massive head to look at her directly, and Savannah froze on the porch, her bare feet cold against the wooden boards. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, woman and bear regarding each other across the space of the yard. Then the bear did something that made Savannah's breath catch in her throat. It reached out one massive paw and gently, so gently, patted the pile of objects beside it. Then it stood and walked back toward the forest. Not running, not hurrying, just walking with that same deliberate pace. At the tree line, it paused and looked back one more time before disappearing into the shadows between the pines. Savannah stood on the porch, her heart pounding, staring at the spot where the bear had vanished. Behind her, she heard the door open and Ethan's footsteps on the porch. "What did it leave?" he asked, because somehow he understood, just as she did, that those objects were meant for them. Together, with Ethan carrying Lily and staying close to the house, Savannah walked across the dew-wet grass to the pine tree. The pile was small but deliberately arranged. 3 pine cones, perfectly intact and arranged in a neat line. A smooth river stone, dark and polished. And strangest of all, a child's toy. A small wooden bear that looked like it had been carved by hand, weathered and old, but carefully placed atop the other items. Savannah knelt down, her fingers hovering over the objects but not quite touching them. "Where did she get this?" she whispered, picking up the wooden bear. It was worn smooth in places, as if it had been handled many times, loved by small hands. Ethan shifted Lily to his other arm and crouched beside her. Maybe from a campsite? Or ... quote. But he didn't finish the thought, because they both knew campsites were rare this far into the wilderness. The nearest hiking trail was miles away. Lily reached out for the wooden bear, making excited sounds, and without thinking, Savannah handed it to her. The baby immediately brought it to her mouth, as she did with everything, gumming the smooth wood happily. "We should go inside," Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. They both kept looking toward the tree line, wondering if the bear was still there, still watching. As they walked back to the house, Savannah carrying the pine cones and stone while Lily clutched the wooden bear, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something. That evening, after Lily was asleep and the dishes were done, Savannah and Ethan sat on the porch despite the cooling air, wrapped in a blanket and watching the forest. "We should tell someone," Ethan said for the 3rd time, but like before, he made no move to actually do it. "Tell them what?" Savannah asked. "That a bear left us presents? That it acted like it wanted to communicate with us? They'd think we were crazy." "Maybe we are crazy," Ethan said, but he pulled her closer under the blanket. "Maybe living out here has finally gotten to us." But even as he said it, they both knew that wasn't true. What had happened this morning was real as the wooden bear that now sat on Lily's dresser, as real as the pine cones Savannah had placed on the mantel, as real as the smooth stone that Ethan kept turning over in his pocket. The next morning, Savannah woke before dawn, something pulling her from sleep with an urgency she couldn't explain. She slipped out of bed without waking Ethan and padded downstairs in her pajamas, not even stopping to make coffee before going to the window. The bear was there, sitting in exactly the same spot as yesterday, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her, almost hidden in her massive shadow, was a smaller shape. A cub, probably born this past winter, still small enough that it could have fit in Savannah's arms, if such a thing were possible. The mother bear saw Savannah at the window and stood, nudging the cub forward with her nose. The little one stumbled a bit, playful and uncoordinated in the way of young animals, but there was something about its movements that made Savannah lean closer to the glass. The cub would start to wander off, investigating a butterfly or an interesting stick, and the mother would make a soft huffing sound, calling it back. But the cub didn't respond, didn't even turn its head at the sound. The mother tried again, louder this time, a sound Savannah could hear even through the window, but the cub continued its exploration, oblivious. Understanding hit Savannah like a physical blow, and she pressed both hands against the window, her breath fogging the glass. The cub couldn't hear its mother. It was deaf. The mother bear looked directly at Savannah then, and in those dark eyes was something that transcended the boundary between human and animal. It was the look of a mother who didn't know how to protect her child, how to teach it, how to warn it of danger when it couldn't hear her voice. It was desperation and hope and a plea, all rolled into one impossible moment of connection. Savannah's eyes filled with tears, and she didn't even realize she was crying until she felt the wetness on her cheeks. Behind her, she heard Ethan coming down the stairs, probably wondering why she had gotten up so early. But she couldn't look away from the bear and her cub, couldn't break this moment of shared understanding between two mothers. The bear sat back down, pulling her cub close with one massive paw, and continued to watch the house with those patient, intelligent eyes. "Savannah?" Ethan's voice was concerned as he came up behind her, seeing her tears. Then he saw the bears, saw the way the cub didn't respond to its mother's calls, saw the same thing Savannah had seen. "Oh my God," he whispered, "is it—" Savannah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They stood together at the window, watching as the mother bear tried again and again to get her cub's attention with sounds it couldn't hear, and Savannah thought her heart might break from the familiarity of it. Because she knew this struggle. Not personally, but she had seen it in the parent support group they attended in town once a month. Lily wasn't deaf, but they had joined the group when she was born to learn sign language, wanting to give their daughter every tool for communication they could. It had started as a whim, something Savannah had read about in a parenting magazine, how teaching babies sign language could help them communicate before they could speak. But it had become so much more than that, a way for their little family to share thoughts and feelings beyond words. The mother bear was still watching them, and Savannah found herself raising her hand to the window, pressing her palm flat against the glass. The bear tilted her head, studying the gesture, and then, impossibly, raised her own paw and held it up, not touching anything but mimicking the position. Ethan's sharp intake of breath told her he had seen it too. Did she just— But he couldn't finish the sentence because what they were seeing was impossible. Over the next hour, they watched as the sun rose fully, and the forest came alive with morning sounds that the little cub couldn't hear. The mother bear kept her baby close, constantly touching it with her paw or nose, using physical contact to communicate what sounds could not. And through it all, she kept glancing at the house, at the window where Savannah and Ethan stood transfixed, as if waiting for something, hoping for something. When Lily woke up, Ethan brought her downstairs, and something extraordinary happened. As soon as the baby appeared at the window, the mother bear stood and nudged her cub to face the house. The little cub saw Lily and became animated, standing on its hind legs and pawing at the air in what looked like excitement. Lily responded with delighted squeals and began doing what she always did when she was happy, signing happy with her chubby little hands, a gesture Savannah had taught her just last week. The mother bear went completely still, her eyes fixed on Lily's hands. She watched intently as Lily repeated the sign, her little fingers spreading and brushing against her chest in the motion they had practiced so many times. Then the bear looked at Savannah. and in that look was a question so clear it might as well have been spoken aloud. Savannah's hands moved without conscious thought, repeating Lily's sign, showing the bear again the gesture for happy. The bear watched, her dark eyes tracking every movement. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted one paw and attempted to recreate the motion against her own chest. It wasn't perfect, couldn't be with paws instead of fingers, but the intent was unmistakable. She was trying to copy the sign. Ethan made a sound that was part gasp, part laugh, part sob. "This can't be happening," he whispered, but his hands were already moving, showing the bear the sign again, slower this time, more deliberate. For the rest of that morning, they stood at the window, an impromptu sign language class with the most unlikely student imaginable. The bear was a quick learner, frighteningly so, picking up simple signs with an intelligence that challenged everything they thought. They knew about animals. More, eat, baby. Each sign modified to work with paws, but recognizable in intent. And through it all, the little deaf cub played at its mother's feet, unaware that its life was about to change in ways none of them could imagine. As the sun climbed higher, the bears finally retreated back into the forest, but not before the mother bear signed more and pointed at the house, then at the sun's position in the sky. Tomorrow. She would be back tomorrow. Savannah and Ethan stood at the window long after the bears had disappeared, trying to process what had just happened. "We're going to teach a bear sign language," Savannah said finally, the words sounding insane even as she said them, "to help her communicate with her deaf cub. We can't tell anyone about this," Ethan said quietly. "They'd never believe us. Or worse, they'd believe us, and—" He didn't need to finish. They both knew what would happen if word got out about bears that were this intelligent, this capable of learning. Scientists would come, and reporters and tourists. The bears would be captured, studied, their peaceful forest turned into a circus. "No," Savannah agreed, "this stays between us." That night, after Lily was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table with every sign language book they owned spread out before them. They were looking for signs that could be modified for paws, gestures that could bridge the gap between species. "What about danger?" Ethan suggested, showing a modified version where instead of fingers, a paw could sweep across. "And look," Savannah added, touching near her eyes. She could tap her face with her paw. They worked late into the night, planning and practicing, preparing for tomorrow's lesson. Because that's what it had become, they realized. They were going to teach a wild bear how to talk to her deaf cub. It was impossible, unbelievable, and absolutely what they were going to do. As they finally headed to bed, exhausted but exhilarated, Savannah stopped at Lily's room. The baby was sleeping peacefully, the wooden bear tucked under her arm. On impulse, Savannah signed, "I love you," in the darkness, and could have sworn she saw a shadow move outside the window, a large shape that might have been watching, learning, hoping. The next morning came gray and drizzling, the kind of soft rain that the forest seemed to absorb like a sponge. Savannah was at the window before dawn, coffee cooling in her hands as she watched the tree line. Ethan joined her, Lily on his hip, and they waited in comfortable silence. Just when Savannah was starting to worry that yesterday had scared the bears away, they appeared. The mother emerged first, checking carefully before allowing her cub to follow. They were both soaked from the rain, their fur slicked down and dripping, but they came to the same spot as before and sat. The mother bear looked at the window and signed "more" with her paw, the gesture already more fluid than yesterday. Savannah's throat tightened with emotion as she signed back "yes" and "good morning," signs they had decided on last night. The bear watched intently, then attempted, "Good morning," the gesture rough but improving. Then something wonderful happened. The mother bear turned to her cub and repeated the sign, tapping the little one to get its attention first, then signing "Good morning" directly at it. The cub, startled by the tap, looked up at its mother and saw the gesture. Its little head tilted in confusion, but it was watching, paying attention in a way it couldn't when its mother used sounds. The mother repeated the sign, patient and deliberate, until the cub lifted its own small paw and tried to copy. It was clumsy, uncoordinated, but it was communication. For the first time, mother and cub were sharing language. Savannah realized she was crying again, and Ethan's eyes were suspiciously bright as well. They spent the next 2 hours at the window, teaching and watching as the mother bear learned new signs and immediately taught them to her cub. Eat, sleep, play, stop. Each one a new tool for the mother to protect and guide her baby. The cub was learning too, its young mind adapting quickly to this visual language, finally able to understand what its mother was trying to tell it. When the rain stopped and weak sunlight broke through the clouds, the bears stood to leave. But before they went, the mother bear did something that would stay with Savannah forever. She signed, "Thank you," a sign they hadn't taught her but she had somehow figured out or perhaps invented, placing her paw over her heart and then extending it toward the house. Then she gathered her cub and disappeared into the forest, leaving the family standing at the window in stunned silence. "Did we just—" Ethan started, but couldn't finish. Because what could he say? That they had just witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the natural world? That they had been chosen, somehow, to be part of something extraordinary? Lily babbled happily and signed "bear" and "friend," and Savannah hugged her tight, wondering what kind of world they were raising her in, where such impossible things could happen. The gifts continued to appear, left at the base of the pine tree, like offerings. More carved wooden animals, smooth stones, and once, incredibly, a handful of late-season berries, carefully placed on a large leaf. But more than the gifts, it was the daily lessons that became the rhythm of their lives. Every morning, rain or shine, the bears would come. Every morning, they would learn new signs, practice old ones, and slowly build a vocabulary that belonged to no human or animal, but somehow to both. Savannah started documenting everything in a journal, writing late at night by lamplight while Ethan slept. She didn't know what she would ever do with these observations, knowing they could never share them with the world, but she felt compelled to record it all. The way the mother bear had started combining signs to make simple sentences. The way the cub had begun signing to itself while playing, practicing its new language. The way both bears would sometimes sit and have what could only be described as conversations, paws moving in the signs they had learned, truly communicating for the first time. One morning, about 3 weeks after that first encounter, something new happened. The mother bear arrived alone, the cub nowhere to be seen. Savannah felt a spike of worry, but the bear seemed calm, signing "baby sleep safe" before sitting in her usual spot. Then she did something she had never done before. She signed, "You baby where?" It took Savannah a moment to understand. Then she signed back, "Baby sleep upstairs." The bear seemed satisfied with this answer, then signed something else, a combination of gestures that took Savannah several tries to understand. "Your baby here good?" The question was so unexpected, so complex in its understanding, that Savannah's hands shook as she signed back, "Yes, baby here good?" The bear was quiet for a moment, then signed "lucky" with such human emotion that Savannah had to sit down. Ethan, who had been watching from behind her, stepped forward and signed, "Your baby see good," trying to convey that while the cub couldn't hear, its other senses were strong. The bear understood immediately, signing back, yes, see good, smell good, feel good. They spent that morning in what could only be called a conversation, the bear asking questions about human cubs, Savannah and Ethan answering as best they could with their limited shared vocabulary. The bear wanted to know everything. How long human cubs stayed with their mothers, what they ate, how they learned. In return, she shared things about bear life, about the challenges of raising a cub who couldn't hear the warning calls of other bears, couldn't hear the sounds that meant danger or food or comfort. When Lily woke from her morning nap, Ethan brought her to the window, and the bear signed, "Hello, little one," with such tenderness that Savannah's eyes filled with tears. Lily, delighted to see her friend, signed back, "Hello, bear," and "Play?" The bear made a sound that might have been laughter, a soft huffing that shook her massive frame, and signed, "Bear, baby play, your baby play. Together, no, but play same." It was then that Savannah understood something profound. This wasn't just about teaching sign language anymore. This was about connection, about two mothers finding common ground across an impossible divide. The bear wasn't just learning to communicate with her cub, she was learning that she wasn't alone in the challenges of motherhood, that even in the vast wilderness there could be understanding and support in the most unexpected places. As autumn progressed and the leaves turned gold and red, their morning meetings became richer and more complex. The bear's vocabulary grew to dozens of signs, and she used them with increasing sophistication. She would tell them about the approaching winter, signing about food gathering and den preparation. She warned them about a male bear 2 valleys over who was aggressive and to be avoided. She even, incredibly, made jokes, signing things like rain much, bear wet, bear grumpy on particularly soggy mornings. The cub, too, was thriving. No longer did it wander obliviously while its mother called. Now it was attentive, always watching its mother's pause for instruction or information. It had learned to sign questions, to express wants and needs, to truly communicate with its mother for the first time in its young life. The transformation was remarkable, and Savannah found herself thinking that they had witnessed something unprecedented, an evolution of sorts, not of body, but of mind and capability. One morning, the bears didn't come. Savannah waited at the window, worry gnawing at her as the hours passed. Ethan tried to reassure her, saying they were wild animals and didn't owe them daily visits, but she could see he was concerned too. When the bears finally appeared the next day, the mother was limping, a gash on her shoulder that looked fresh and painful. She signed danger and fight and protect baby, and they understood that she had defended her cub from something, probably the aggressive male she had warned them about. Without thinking, Savannah signed help and started toward the door, but the bear signed no firmly, then added safe now and thank you. It was clear she had come to show them she was all right, to maintain the connection they had built. She stayed only briefly that day, clearly tired and in pain, but before leaving she signed something new, something she had never signed before. She pointed at Savannah, then Ethan, then the house, and signed family. Then she pointed at herself and her cub and signed family. Finally, she gestured to encompass all of them and signed family one more time. The meaning was clear. In her mind, they had become something more than just two species sharing space. They had become connected in a way that transcended the normal boundaries of the wild. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time, because winter was coming, and soon the bears would hibernate, and this magical autumn of communication would end. Savannah signed family yes through her tears, and the bear seemed satisfied, gathering her cub and limping back into the forest. As October turned to November, the morning visits became less frequent. The bears were preparing for winter, the mother teaching her cub about den building and food storage, all through sign language now. When they did come, the mother would sign about being tired, about the cub getting sleepy more often, about the pull of the coming hibernation. Savannah and Ethan knew their time was running out, and each visit felt precious, something to be treasured and remembered. Chapter 2. A Mother's Plea. The last week of November brought the first real snow, thick flakes that covered the ground in a pristine white blanket. Savannah stood at the window earlier than usual, her breath fogging the glass as she searched the tree line for any sign of movement. It had been 3 days since they had seen the bears, and the worry was a constant ache in her chest. Lily was in her high chair, cheerfully smearing banana across the tray and occasionally signing "bear" with sticky fingers, asking where her friends were. When the shapes finally appeared against the white landscape, Savannah's relief was so intense she had to grip the windowsill for support. But something was different. The mother bear was moving slowly, deliberately, and the cub was pressed close against her side. They made their way to the usual spot, and Savannah could see the exhaustion in every movement. Winter was calling them to sleep, and they were fighting against it to come here, to maintain this connection they had built. The mother bear sat heavily in the snow and looked up at the window. Her eyes, those intelligent dark eyes that had first captured Savannah's attention months ago, seemed to hold an urgency that made Savannah's heart race. The bear lifted her paw and began to sign, but these weren't the usual morning greetings or weather observations. She signed. The winter had settled deep into the mountains, transforming the forest into a crystalline wonderland that sparkled in the weak December sunlight. Savannah pressed her palm against the cold window glass, watching her breath create small clouds of condensation that she had to constantly wipe away. It had been 2 weeks since the bears had begun their hibernation, 2 weeks since that final, emotional goodbye where the mother bear had signed "Sleep Now" and "Sea Spring" before disappearing into the white wilderness with her cub. The house felt different without their morning visits, emptier somehow, as if the bears had taken some vital energy with them when they left. Lily had adjusted to their absence better than Savannah expected, though she still signed "Bear Where" at least once a day, usually while looking out the window at the empty clearing. Ethan had suggested they tell her the bears were sleeping, which was true, and Lily seemed to accept this explanation with the easy adaptability of childhood. But Savannah found herself waking at dawn anyway, standing at the window with her coffee, hoping against hope to see those familiar shapes emerge from the tree line. The logical part of her brain knew they were deep in hibernation, safely tucked away in whatever den they had prepared. But her heart couldn't quite accept that this magical chapter of their lives had paused. She had filled 3 journals now with observations and sketches, documenting every sign the bears had learned, every moment of communication they had shared. Late at night, while Ethan and Lily slept, she would read through them, reliving those extraordinary mornings. The mother bear had learned over 60 signs by the time winter arrived, and her cub had mastered nearly 40. They had developed their own variations too, adaptations that worked better with paws than fingers, creating what Savannah had started thinking of as a true interspecies language. The wooden bear that had been the first gift still sat on Lily's dresser, joined now by a collection of other treasures the bears had left them. Smooth river stones that Ethan had arranged on the mantelpiece, pine cones that Savannah had turned into decorations, and even a few particularly beautiful feathers that the cub had apparently found and wanted to share. Each object was a reminder of the trust that had been built, the bridge that had been crossed between wild and domestic, animal and human. January brought deeper snow and bitter cold that kept them inside most days. The clearing where the bears had sat was now buried under 3 feet of white, and the pine tree where they had left their gifts was heavy with icicles. Savannah threw herself into teaching Lily more signs, expanding her vocabulary far beyond what most 1-year-olds could manage. It felt like a way to honor what the bears had taught them about communication, about the importance of finding ways to connect across differences. Lily took to it with enthusiasm, her little hands constantly moving, signing about everything she saw and felt and wanted. One particularly cold evening, as they sat by the fire with Lily playing on the rug, Ethan brought up something they had both been thinking but hadn't voiced. "What if they don't come back?" he asked quietly, watching Lily sign story to her stuffed animals. "What if something happens during hibernation, or they find a different territory, or—" Savannah stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. She had worried about the same things, had lain awake imagining all the dangers that could befall hibernating bears, from flooding dens to predators, to simple starvation if they hadn't stored enough fat for the winter. "They'll come back," she said with more confidence than she felt. "The mother bear signed See Spring, and I believe her. She's too smart, too careful with her cub to make a promise she couldn't keep." But even as she said it, she knew that nature didn't always respect promises or intentions. The wilderness was beautiful, but unforgiving, and their bear friends were subject to its harsh realities just like any other wild creature. Still, she had to believe, had to hold on to the hope that spring would bring reunion. February crawled by with more snow and days that felt endless in their sameness. Lily was walking now, toddling around the house with determination, and her signing had become even more sophisticated. She could tell simple stories with her hands, usually about bears and babies and snow, narratives that made Savannah's heart ache with their innocent hope. Ethan had started incorporating sign language into his bedtime stories, creating elaborate tales that Lily would watch with rapt attention, her eyes following his hands as closely as she listened to his voice. They had decided, after much discussion, that they would never tell anyone about the bears. It would remain their family secret, something precious and private that belonged only to them. The world wouldn't understand, Savannah knew. People would want to study it, to document it, to turn it into something scientific and cold. But what they had experienced was warm and personal and almost sacred in its improbability. It was a gift, and gifts like that weren't meant to be dissected and analyzed. The first week of March brought a sudden warm spell, temperatures rising enough to start melting the snow in patches. Savannah found herself at the window more often, watching for any sign of movement in the forest. She knew it was still too early, that bears typically didn't emerge from hibernation until later in March or even April, but she couldn't help hoping. Every crack of a branch, every shadow that moved, sent her heart racing with possibility. It was Lily who saw them first. She was sitting on the floor near the window, playing with blocks, when suddenly she started signing frantically, "Bear, bear, bear," and pointing outside. Savannah rushed to the window, her coffee mug forgotten on the counter, and there they were. Thinner than before, their fur somewhat matted from months of sleep, but unmistakably their bears. The mother emerged first, moving slowly and carefully through the remaining snow, testing each step. Behind her the cub followed, significantly bigger than when they had last seen it but still clearly young. Savannah's hands shook as she signed "Welcome back" through the window, tears streaming down her face. The mother bear saw the movement and stopped, sitting down in almost the exact spot where she had spent so many mornings the previous fall. She lifted her paw slowly, as if remembering how to do it, and signed, "Hello, family." The cub, seeing its mother sign, immediately copied the gesture with an enthusiasm that made Savannah laugh through her tears. Ethan came running at the sound of Savannah's emotional exclamation, and when he saw the bears, he picked up Lily and held her up to the window. Lily's joy was explosive, her hands moving so fast in excitement that her signs became a blur of bear friend happy love play. The mother bear watched the baby's enthusiastic signing and made that soft huffing sound that they had learned was her version of laughter. Then she signed something new, something she must have been thinking about during the long winter months. She signed Miss You. The reunion was everything Savannah had hoped for and more. The bears stayed for over an hour that first day, relearning their shared language, adding new signs that the mother had apparently thought of during hibernation. She had developed a sign for winter sleep and another for dream, which suggested a level of cognitive complexity that still made Savannah's head spin when she thought about it too hard. The cub showed off how much it had grown, standing on its hind legs to demonstrate its new height, then signing Big Now with obvious pride. Over the following weeks, their morning meetings resumed with a regularity that brought structure and joy back to Savannah's days. The bears were different after their hibernation, somehow more confident in their communication, more sophisticated in their signing. The mother bear began telling them stories about their winter, about dreams of fish and berries, about the warmth of the den and the strange suspended time of hibernation. She asked about their winter, too, wanting to know about human cold-time activities, fascinated by concepts like Christmas and heating systems. The cub's signing had improved dramatically, as if the long sleep had somehow consolidated its learning. It could now hold simple conversations, asking questions and expressing complex ideas with a fluency that amazed everyone. One morning, it signed something that made Savannah gasp. It pointed at Lily, then at itself, then signed same but different. The philosophical depth of that observation from such a young creature was staggering. It understood, on some level, that despite their obvious differences, there was a fundamental similarity between itself and the human child. April brought full spring to the mountains, and with it, changes to their routine. The bears began coming at different times, sometimes in the evening when the sunset painted the mountains gold, sometimes in the middle of the day when Lily was napping. The mother bear explained through signs that they were traveling more now, exploring territory, teaching the cub about the wider world. But they always came back, never letting more than 2 days pass without a visit. One afternoon, the mother bear arrived agitated, signing danger and men and loud. Through patient questioning, Savannah and Ethan learned that hunters had been spotted several valleys over, and the bear was worried. She had never encountered humans other than them, humans who didn't understand the intelligence they were dealing with. The fear in her signs was palpable, not just for herself but for her cub who trusted too easily, who might approach humans expecting the same kindness it had found here. Without hesitation, Ethan signed, "Stay close, here safe," offering their land as sanctuary. The bear understood immediately, signing "Grateful" and "Trust you." For the next week, the bears stayed within sight of the house almost constantly, the mother teaching her cub to forage in the small meadow behind their property, while always keeping the building in view. It was during this time that something extraordinary happened, something that would change everything. Lily had been playing on the porch while Savannah watched from a chair, the warm spring sun making them both drowsy. The bears were at the edge of the clearing, the cub playing with a stick while its mother dozed. Suddenly, Lily stood up and toddled toward the steps, moving faster than Savannah expected. Before she could react, Lily had made it down the steps and was walking determinedly toward the bears, signing "Play" as she went. Savannah's heart stopped. She jumped up, ready to run after her daughter, but something in the mother bear's posture made her freeze. The massive animal had risen to her feet, but showed no signs of aggression. Instead, she signed "stop" to her cub, who had started to approach Lily with curiosity. Then, incredibly, the mother bear signed to Lily, "Come slow, gentle." Lily, who had been taught to listen to signing no matter who did it, immediately slowed her approach, her little hands signing "friend" and "gentle" as she walked. What followed was a moment of pure magic that Savannah would remember for the rest of her life. Lily stopped about 5 feet from the bears, sitting down in the grass with a plop. The cub, with permission from its mother, approached slowly and sat down too, mimicking Lily's cross-legged position. The two young ones looked at each other, and then simultaneously signed "hello." The cub reached out with one paw and very gently touched a flower near Lily, then signed "pretty." Lily picked the flower and held it out to the cub, who sniffed it delicately before signing "thank you." They sat there for maybe 10 minutes, two babies of different species, communicating in perfect harmony. The mother bear watched with an intensity that Savannah recognized, the fierce protective love of a mother combined with wonder at what her child was experiencing. When a cloud passed over the sun and the air cooled, the mother signed "time go" to her cub, who signed "bye-bye friend" to Lily, before following its mother back to the forest edge. Lily waved and signed "love you bear," before toddling back to Savannah, who scooped her up with shaking hands. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Savannah and Ethan sat on the porch in stunned silence, trying to process what had happened. Their daughter had just had a successful, safe interaction with wild bears, something that should have been impossible. Something that was impossible in any normal circumstance. But nothing about their situation was normal anymore. They had somehow become part of something larger, a bridge between worlds that weren't supposed to touch. May brought warmer days and new challenges. The cub was getting bigger and more independent, sometimes signing arguments with its mother about wanting to explore further or stay out later. It was remarkably like watching human teenagers push boundaries, except the teenager in question was a bear. The mother handled it with patience, signing explanations about safety and the importance of staying together, and usually the cub would eventually agree, though sometimes with what could only be described as teenage bear sulking. One morning, the mother bear arrived alone again, something that had become more common as the cub grew more independent. She signed that her baby was practicing fishing at the stream, carefully supervised by another bear she trusted, a female from a neighboring territory who had cubs of her own. The casual mention of bear child care arrangements was another moment that made Savannah reevaluate everything she thought she knew about animal behavior and society. The mother bear had something specific she wanted to discuss. Through careful signing, she explained that she had been teaching other bears some of the signs, specifically the ones for danger and food and help. She wanted to know if this was acceptable, if Savannah and Ethan minded that their gift of language was being spread. Savannah signed back immediately that it was wonderful, that language should be shared, that maybe it could help other bears stay safe from humans who didn't understand them. The bear seemed relieved and signed something that took Savannah a moment to understand. She was asking if Savannah would teach her more complex signs for concepts beyond immediate survival. She wanted to learn signs for emotions beyond happy and sad, for abstract ideas like hope and memory and future. The request was so sophisticated, so fundamentally human in its desire for deeper expression, that Savannah had to take a moment to compose herself before agreeing. They spent that morning working on abstract concepts, with Savannah trying to explain through signs and demonstrations what hope meant, what remember looked like in gesture. The bear was a patient student, practicing each sign until she had it right, then creating sentences that showed she truly understood. She signed, "I remember winter, remember dreams, remember missing you," with such perfect comprehension that Ethan, watching from the doorway, had to turn away to hide his emotional response. As spring turned toward summer, the bears' visits became a cherished but normalized part of their routine. Lily would have her breakfast while watching for them, signing, "Bear coming today?" as naturally as she might ask about the weather. When they did appear, she would wave and sign greetings before returning to her toys, the miraculous having become beautifully mundane. The cub would often sign jokes to make Lily laugh, having learned that certain combinations of signs were funny to the human child. One day, in early June, the mother bear brought something new. Held carefully in her mouth was a piece of bark, and on it, incredibly, were marks. Not random scratches, but deliberate patterns that looked almost like attempts at writing. She placed it carefully on the ground and signed, "I make marks like you." Savannah's hands trembled as she picked up the bark, seeing the clear attempt at mimicking the act of writing she had observed Savannah doing in her journal through the window. The implications were staggering. The bear had not only understood that the marks Savannah made had meaning, but had attempted to create her own. They weren't letters or even symbols that meant anything specific, but the intent was clear. The bear wanted to record things, to make marks that could communicate beyond the immediate moment. Savannah signed "beautiful" and "smart" and "proud of you," and the bear's pleasure was obvious in the way she sat up straighter, the way her eyes brightened. Ethan suggested they leave paper and thick crayons on the porch, curious to see what would happen. The next morning, they found the paper covered in deliberate marks and the crayons worn down from use. The cub had apparently participated too, its mark smaller and less controlled, but equally deliberate. It was art or writing or something in between, a form of expression that belonged to no known category but was undeniably meaningful. As the days grew longer and warmer, Savannah noticed changes in the forest around them. More birds seemed to linger near their clearing, and deer would graze closer to the house than ever before. It was as if the peaceful coexistence they had established with the bears had somehow spread, creating a zone of interspecies harmony that extended beyond just their immediate relationship. Even the typically skittish rabbits would now sit in plain view, as if understanding that this was a safe place. The mother bear confirmed this observation one morning, signing that other animals had noticed their friendship and understood that the humans here were different. She signed, "You teach us, we teach others, all learn safe together." It was a beautiful thought, that their simple act of communication had rippled outward, creating waves of understanding in the forest community. Savannah wondered if this was how change really happened, not in grand gestures but in small acts of connection that spread like seeds on the wind. July brought hot days that made the bears sluggish, and they would often arrive panting, their thick fur clearly uncomfortable in the heat. Savannah started leaving a large tub of water on the lawn, and the bears would drink and sometimes splash, the cub playing in it while its mother watched indulgently. These water play sessions became Lily's favorite, and she would sign "Bear Swim" and laugh as the cub splashed and rolled, creating muddy puddles that its mother would then have to clean it from. It was during one of these lazy summer afternoons that the mother bear signed something that changed everything. She had been watching Lily play with her toys, and suddenly signed, "More humans, come here." Savannah, confused, signed back, "No, just us." The bear shook her head and signed again, this time more clearly. "Future? More humans learn signs? More humans understand bears?" The question was so complex, so forward-thinking, that Savannah had to sit down to process it. The bear was asking about the future of their communication, about whether this bridge they had built could be extended to others. She was thinking beyond just her own cub, beyond just this family, to a possible future where humans and bears could communicate more broadly. It was visionary thinking from a creature that most people considered incapable of basic reasoning, and it forced Savannah to confront the responsibility of what they had started. After much discussion with Ethan that night, they decided to be honest with the bear. The next morning, Savannah signed carefully that most humans weren't ready to understand, that fear and misunderstanding were still too strong. But she also signed maybe future different, maybe Lily teach others when grown, maybe world change slow. The bear seemed to understand, signing slow okay, change still good. August arrived with thunderstorms that rolled through the mountains like living things, and the bears would arrive at the house soaked and somewhat annoyed, signing complaints about the weather that made everyone laugh. The cub had developed a particular dislike for thunder, not because it could hear it, but because it could feel the vibrations, and it would press close to its mother during storms, signing "don't like" repeatedly until the weather passed. One morning, after a particularly severe storm, the bears didn't come at their usual time. Savannah waited anxiously, and when they finally appeared in the afternoon, she could see something was wrong. The mother was limping again, and there were new scratches on both bears. Through patient signing, the story emerged. The storm had damaged their main den. A tree had fallen across it, and in trying to find emergency shelter, they had encountered the aggressive male bear again. This time, the cub had been involved in the confrontation, trying to protect its mother with a fierceness that had surprised everyone, including the attacker. The cub signed proudly, "I fight, I protect Mama," while its mother signed a mixture of pride and worry that Savannah recognized deeply. The universal challenge of motherhood, watching your child grow strong enough to fight their own battles while wishing you could keep them safe forever. Without hesitation, Ethan signed, "Stay here until den fixed," gesturing to a sheltered area under a large overhang on their property where the bears could rest safely. The mother bear's gratitude was evident, but she signed, "Not take advantage, not become dependent." Even in her need, she was thinking about maintaining the delicate balance they had established. Wild animals who were friends but not pets, independent but connected. For the next week, the bears stayed close, venturing out to forage but always returning to the sheltered spot. Lily was thrilled to have her friends so near, and would spend hours on the porch signing conversations with the cub about everything from favorite foods to the shapes of clouds. The cub taught Lily bear games, showing her how to pretend to fish and dig for roots, while Lily taught the cub human games like peekaboo, which translated surprisingly well into signs. During this time, something remarkable happened with the language itself. The constant interaction led to rapid evolution in their communication, with new signs being created spontaneously to express ideas that their existing vocabulary couldn't capture. The cub invented a sign for pretend after watching Lily play with her dolls, and Lily created a sign for wondering when trying to explain why she liked to watch the stars. These new signs were immediately adopted by everyone, the language growing organically through use. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the mother bear did something unprecedented. She signed a story, a real narrative with beginning, middle, and end. It was about a young bear who got lost but found her way home by following the stars, and though the signs were simple, the story structure was complex. She had observed Ethan telling Lily bedtime stories, and had understood not just the words but the concept of narrative itself. When she finished, Lily clapped her hands and signed, "More story, please," and the bear obliged with another tale, this one about a fish that was too smart to be caught. Ethan and Savannah sat in stunned silence, watching a wild bear tell stories to their daughter, the boundary between human and animal culture blurring beyond recognition. Later, Ethan whispered, "We're watching evolution happen. Not biological, but cultural. This is how language and story began, maybe, with someone reaching across difference to share meaning." September came with its cool mornings and golden afternoons, and the bear's den was finally repaired enough for them to return to it. But they still came every day, the bond now too strong to be affected by distance or dwelling places. The cub was nearly as large as its mother now, though still young in its movements and thinking. It had started showing interest in the wider world, signing questions about things beyond the forest, about the lights it could see from the town in the distance, about the planes that flew overhead. Savannah found herself in the position of trying to explain human civilization to a bear, a task that often revealed how arbitrary and strange human life could seem. Why did humans live in boxes instead of dens? Why did they travel in loud machines instead of walking? Why did they cover their fur with other materials? The cub's questions were innocent but profound, forcing Savannah to think about her own species from an entirely outside perspective. One morning, the mother bear arrived with news that would change the dynamic once again. Through careful signing, she explained that she was pregnant, that come winter she would have new cubs. The cub, her first baby who was now nearly grown, would need to establish its own territory soon, though it could stay through one more winter if needed. The natural cycle of bear life was asserting itself, but modified by their unique situation. The cub seemed both excited and anxious about the news, signing, "I be big sibling" with pride, but also, "Where I go," with worry. The mother reassured it that there was time, that they would find a good territory close enough to visit, that the friendship with the humans would help keep it safe. It was a conversation that any human family might have about a young adult preparing to leave home. Except the participants were bears. Savannah felt a deep sadness at the thought of the cub leaving. This young bear who had learned to sign before it could properly fish, who had played with Lily and shared stories and jokes. But she also understood that this was nature's way, that the cub needed to live its own life, to possibly teach its own cubs someday the language it had learned here. The thought of sign language spreading through the bear population, generation by generation, was both thrilling and sobering. As October arrived with its crisp air and changing leaves, their meetings took on a bittersweet quality. The mother bear was moving slower, her pregnancy beginning to show, and she signed that she was getting tired more easily. The cub had started exploring further on its own, sometimes missing the morning meetings to scout potential territories, though it always returned to share what it had found, signing excitedly about good fishing spots and safe dens. One particularly beautiful morning, with frost sparkling on the grass and the mountains painted in fall colors, the mother bear signed something that made Savannah's eyes fill with tears. "You save us," she signed, then clarified, "not from danger. From silence, from alone. You give us words, give us more family." She paused, seeming to search for the right signs, then continued, "My baby different because of you. All babies after different, better." It was a profound statement about the impact of their friendship, about how a simple act of communication had fundamentally changed the trajectory of these bears' lives, and possibly the lives of bears for generations to come. Savannah signed back, her hands shaking. "You change us too. Teach us about possible, about connection, about family bigger than we knew." The bear understood, signing simply "good changes" with a certainty that was deeply moving. As November approached and the air grew colder, they all knew their time was running short again. The mother bear needed to hibernate, especially with cubs growing inside her. and her nearly grown cub needed to make final preparations for its first winter alone. The meetings became more precious, each one potentially the last before the long sleep. Lily seemed to understand on some level, signing, "I love you," more frequently to both bears, holding up her hands to the window even when they weren't there. The final meeting before hibernation came on a gray day with the smell of snow in the air. Both bears arrived early and stayed late, as if they too were reluctant to begin the separation. The mother bear had brought gifts again, winter berries and beautiful stones, but more importantly, she brought signs of the future. She signed that her cub had chosen a territory just 2 valleys over, close enough to visit when the weather was good. She signed that she would teach her new cubs the language from birth, that they would grow up bilingual in bear and sign. The cub, now truly a young adult bear, though still her baby, signed its own message. "I remember everything. I teach others. I come back visit. I bring my babies someday meet Lily." It was a promise for the future, a commitment to maintaining the connection across generations. Then it did something extraordinary. It created a new sign, one that seemed to mean something like family beyond blood or chosen family, and used it to describe their relationship. As the bears prepared to leave for their winter sleep, Savannah signed one more thing, an idea she and Ethan had discussed. "We write your story. Not share now, but save for right time. Save for when world ready. Your story important." The mother bear seemed to consider this, then signed "trust you" and "thank you," and finally "until spring." With that, she gathered her cub, and they walked toward the forest. But at the tree line, they both turned and signed "love" before disappearing into the shadows. The winter that followed felt both longer and shorter than the previous one. Longer because now they were waiting for 3 bears instead of 2, wondering about the new cubs that would be born in the den. Shorter because they had Lily to keep them busy, her vocabulary expanding daily, her understanding of the world deepened by her unusual experiences. She would tell anyone who would listen about her bear friends, though most people assumed it was an elaborate imaginary game. They prepared through the winter, making picture cards with signs that might be useful for teaching baby bears, planning how to help the mother manage multiple cubs with different needs. Ethan built a simple shelter on their property, just in case the bears needed emergency housing again. Savannah filled notebook after notebook with observations and thoughts, creating a record that might someday help the world understand what they had witnessed. March came slowly, then all at once, and with it came the waiting. Every morning, Savannah was at the window. Every afternoon, Lily would sign "Bears Wake Up," and every evening they would go to bed with a mixture of hope and disappointment. But finally, on a morning when the sun was bright and the snow was melting in earnest, they came. The mother emerged first, thinner but healthy, and behind her, incredibly, were 3 small cubs, tiny bundles of fur that tumbled over each other in their eagerness to explore. But it was the 4th figure that made Savannah cry out with joy. The original cub, now a fully grown young bear, emerged from a different part of the forest and joined its mother and new siblings in the clearing. It had survived its first winter alone and had come back just as promised. The mother bear looked exhausted but triumphant, and she signed "All safe, all here, family bigger." The new cubs were fascinated by the house and the humans watching from within. Their mother signed to them constantly. Simple things like "safe" and "friend" and "watch." It would be weeks before they could understand, but she was already beginning their education, already preparing them for a world where communication between species was possible. The older sibling helped, demonstrating signs and gently correcting the cubs when they wandered too far. Spring unfolded with a richness that surpassed even Savannah's hopes. The 3 cubs were different in personality, One bold and quick to learn, one cautious and observant, one playful and constantly distracted. Their mother managed them with patience and skill, using signs to direct them even before they understood, creating associations that would eventually become comprehension. The older sibling visited regularly, sharing news from its territory, proudly signing about successful fishing and a particularly comfortable den it had found. Lily was enchanted by the baby bears, signing baby and cute so often that it became a running joke. The cubs were equally fascinated by her, watching her play through the window, trying to mimic her movements. By May, the boldest cub had learned its first sign, a clumsy but recognizable version of hello that it would repeat endlessly, clearly proud of its accomplishment. The other cubs followed soon after, and suddenly the morning meetings were full of tiny paws attempting signs, getting them wrong more often than right, but improving daily. The mother bear was different with this litter, more confident in her teaching, more sophisticated in her approach. She had figured out that starting with signs for things the cubs could see and touch worked better than abstract concepts. She taught them food and water and sleep first, practical signs that had immediate relevance to their lives. But she also taught them human and friend and family, making sure they understood from the beginning that the people in the house were part of their extended clan. One morning in early June, something happened that proved how profoundly things had changed. A hiker appeared at the edge of their property, lost and looking for the trail. Ethan went out to help, and the bears, instead of fleeing or becoming aggressive, simply watched. The mother signed stranger to her cubs and stay here, and they obeyed, sitting quietly until the hiker had been directed back to the trail and had left. It was a level of trust and understanding that would have been impossible without their shared language. As summer progressed, the cubs' vocabulary grew rapidly. The bold one learned fastest, but often got signs wrong in amusing ways, once signing eat sleep when it meant sleep eat, and confusing everyone. The cautious one learned slowly but accurately, never using a sign until it was sure it had it right. The playful one treated signs like a game, creating silly combinations that made Lily giggle and even seemed to amuse its mother. The older sibling had matured remarkably during its independent months. It signed with an authority that surprised everyone, sharing knowledge about the forest that even its mother didn't know. It had encountered other bears and had tried to teach them basic signs, with limited but encouraging success. It reported that some bears were receptive, especially younger ones, while others were suspicious of the strange gestures. But seeds were being planted, the language slowly spreading beyond their small circle. July brought a challenge they hadn't anticipated. The local wildlife department had noticed the unusual bear activity in the area and sent someone to investigate. The official knocked on their door on a hot afternoon, asking if they had been feeding bears or otherwise encouraging them to approach human habitation. Savannah's heart raced as she denied it, technically truthfully since they had never fed them, while knowing that what they were actually doing was far more extraordinary than anything the official could imagine. The bears seemed to understand the danger, staying away for several days after the official's visit. When they finally returned, the mother signed careful and protect secret, showing a comprehension of the situation that was staggering. She had somehow understood that not all humans would appreciate or accept what they had built together, that their friendship needed to be guarded. From then on, the bears were more cautious, checking for strangers before approaching, teaching the cubs to hide if unknown humans appeared. August was a month of growth and change. The cubs were getting bigger, their personalities more distinct. The bold one had started showing leadership qualities, often helping its siblings understand new signs. The cautious one had become the family's best forager, finding berries and roots that even its mother missed. The playful one had developed a special bond with Lily, seeming to understand her in a way that went beyond signs, responding to her emotions with an empathy that was remarkably human-like. The older sibling announced through signs that it had met another bear, a young female who was curious about the signs and wanted to learn. It was shy about sharing more details, but the mother bear seemed pleased, signing "good" and "teach her" with maternal approval. The idea of the language spreading through bear courtship and pair bonding was something Savannah hadn't considered, but it made perfect sense. Language had always been a tool for connection, and what connection was more fundamental than that between mates? One morning, in late August, the mother bear taught her cubs something that took Savannah's breath away. She had them sit in a line and then signed. The story of how she met the humans, how she learned to speak with her paws, how it had changed everything for their family. It was history, oral tradition translated into sign, the beginning of bear culture being passed to the next generation. The cubs watched with rapt attention, occasionally signing questions that their mother patiently answered. When the story was finished, the bold cub signed, "We special," and the mother replied, "All bears special, we just know it." It was a philosophical statement that suggested an understanding of self-worth and identity that most humans wouldn't attribute to animals. But then again, everything about these bears challenged human assumptions about animal consciousness and capability. They were proving that, given the right tools, the right opportunity, the gap between human and animal intelligence was far smaller than anyone had imagined. September arrived with its familiar bittersweet feeling of impending separation. The cubs were nearly half-grown now, round with fat reserves for the winter but still playful and childlike in many ways. They had learned dozens of signs and could hold simple conversations, asking questions about everything from why leaves changed color to where the sun went at night. Their curiosity was boundless, and Savannah found herself constantly challenged to explain the world in signs that young bears could understand. The older sibling visited less frequently now, busy with its own preparations and its new relationship. When it did come, it brought the female with it. A beautiful bear, with reddish-brown fur and intelligent eyes. She was shy at first, hanging back at the tree line, but gradually gained confidence as she watched the family's interactions. Within a week, she was signing basic greetings and had learned the names the humans used for each other. One evening, as they all sat in the clearing in the golden light of sunset, Savannah realized that what had started as 2 bears had become 7, and that was just the ones they could see. Who knew how many other bears in the forest had learned a sign or two, had begun to understand that communication with humans was possible? They had started something that could not be stopped, a revolution in interspecies relations that was spreading slowly but inevitably through the mountain forests. The mother bear seemed to be thinking similar thoughts. She signed "future different because of us," and then, after a pause, "good different." She looked at her cubs, at her grown child with its new mate, at the humans who had become family, and signed "proud" with a gesture that encompassed them all. It was a moment of perfect understanding, of recognition that they had all participated in something extraordinary, something that would ripple outward in ways they couldn't yet imagine. As October began and the leaves turned brilliant gold and red, the preparations for hibernation began in earnest. The mother bear was teaching her cubs about Denny, preparation, about the importance of eating enough to sustain them through the long sleep. But she was also teaching them about spring, signing about the reunion that would come, about how the humans would be waiting when they woke. The cubs seemed to understand, signing "sleep then, friends," again, with acceptance, if not enthusiasm. The older sibling and its mate had found a den together, a development that delighted everyone. They would hibernate together, and perhaps, come spring, there would be news of more cubs to carry the language forward. The female had learned enough signs to express her gratitude to the humans, signing, "Thank you for teaching," with a sincerity that was deeply moving. She understood that she had been given something precious, a gift that would enrich her life and the lives of her future cubs. The last week before hibernation was precious and poignant. Each meeting felt weighted with significance, each sign potentially the last for months. Lily had grown enough to understand that the bears would sleep for a long time, and she signed "Miss you" repeatedly, making sure each bear, even the smallest cub, received her message. The cubs had learned to sign "love" and used it liberally, their small paws forming the gesture with touching earnestness. On the final day, the entire extended bear family gathered in the clearing. The mother, her 3 cubs, her grown child, and its mate all sat together, a testament to the bonds that had been formed. The mother signed a long message, thanking the humans for their patience, their teaching, their friendship. She promised that the language would not die with them, that it would spread and grow, that someday many bears would speak with their paws. Then she did something unprecedented. She stood on her hind legs, tall and majestic, and placed one paw over her heart. The other bears followed suit, even the smallest cub wobbling unsteadily on its legs. It was a salute, a gesture of respect and love that transcended species. Savannah, Ethan, and Lily stood at the window and returned the gesture, their hands over their hearts, tears streaming down all their faces. As the bears walked toward the forest for the last time that year, the smallest cub turned back and signed something it had just learned, something its mother must have taught it specifically for this moment. It signed, "Until we meet again," a complex concept for such a young creature, but delivered with perfect clarity. Then they were gone, disappeared into the wilderness to sleep and dream through the winter. The house felt impossibly quiet after they left, but it wasn't the empty quiet of loss. It was the quiet of anticipation, of knowing that spring would come, and with it, reunion. Lily stood at the window for a long time, her small hand pressed against the glass, and finally signed, "They come back," with the certainty of a child who had learned that some promises are always kept. That night, as Savannah wrote in her journal, she thought about the journey they had been on, from that first morning when she saw a shadow at the tree line to this extended family of signing bears. They had proven that communication could bridge any gap, that understanding could grow in the most unlikely places, that love and connection were not limited by species or form. They had changed the world, even if the world didn't know it yet. Winter settled over the mountains once again, but this time it felt different. The silence wasn't empty, but full of sleeping potential. Somewhere in hidden dens, bears were dreaming, their minds processing the language they had learned, preparing to wake with new understanding. And in a small house at the edge of the forest, a human family waited and planned and dreamed their own dreams of spring, of reunion, of a future where the impossible had become beautifully, wonderfully real. The story Savannah was writing grew longer each night, a record of something unprecedented in human history. She wrote about the mother bear's intelligence and determination, about the cubs' different learning styles, about the older siblings' journey to independence. She wrote about Lily growing up bilingual in English and sign, thinking it perfectly normal to have conversations with bears. She wrote about Ethan's quiet support and wonder, about her own transformation from someone who feared the wild to someone who had found family within it. But mostly she wrote about communication itself, about how the simple act of sharing language had created a bridge that seemed impossible to cross. The bears hadn't become human, and the humans hadn't become bears, but they had met in a middle space created by signs and gestures, by patience and trust, by the fundamental need all conscious beings have to be understood. They had proven that the boundaries between species were more fluid than anyone imagined, that consciousness and emotion and intelligence existed on a spectrum that included far more than just humanity. As February arrived with its deep snow and bitter cold, Savannah found herself thinking about the future. Lily would grow up with this secret, this knowledge that the world was far more magical and connected than most people knew. Would she become a scientist, driven to understand interspecies communication? Would she become an advocate for wildlife, armed with the knowledge of just how complex and sentient animals could be? Or would she simply live her life enriched by the understanding that family could take many forms? The bears would continue to spread the language, teaching their cubs who would teach their cubs, creating a parallel culture in the forests. Perhaps someday, when the world was ready, the secret could be revealed. Perhaps there would come a time when humans and bears could communicate openly, when the fear and misunderstanding that separated them could be replaced with the kind of connection Savannah's family had found. It seemed impossible, but then everything about their situation had once seemed impossible. March came with its promise of renewal, and one morning Savannah woke to find fresh tracks in the snow leading to their clearing. Her heart racing, she went to the window to find not just their bear family, but 3 other bears she didn't recognize, all sitting patiently in the snow. The mother bear was there, thinner but healthy, her cubs tumbling around her. The older sibling and its mate were there, and the mate's belly showed the promise of new cubs. But the 3 strangers were what made Savannah gasp. As she watched, one of the stranger bears lifted its paw and slowly, carefully signed, "Hello," and then, "Learn, please." The mother bear had been teaching others, had been spreading the gift of communication beyond their immediate circle. The revolution they had started was growing, spreading through the forest like morning light through trees. Savannah signed back "Hello" and "Welcome," and saw the stranger bear's eyes widen with wonder at being understood.